Welcome back. Chapter 19, Tuesday, June 6, 2017. On Tuesday morning, the day after Sydney visited the Sabols in Fayetteville, she and Derek left the network headquarters in Midtown and cabbed to Bellevue Hospital. Inside, directions came from the information desk, and after 2 elevator rides and a quarter-mile of fluorescent-lit hallways, they found the OBGYN ward. Sydney Ryan to see Dr. Reiser, she said to the receptionist, through the door and to your left. Derek lifted his camera and set it on his shoulder. He peered through the viewfinder and adjusted for the bright lighting of the obstetrics ward. After a moment, he put his thumb and index finger together to give Sydney the OK sign as the automated glass doors opened. A brief perusing of Grace visitors over the years showed only a couple of non-relatives that had consistently made the trip to the correctional facility in St. Lucia's. Ellie Reiser was one of them. As Sydney knocked on the doorframe, Dr. Reiser was already moving across the office to greet her. With a broad smile, she shook hands with Sydney as Derek backed into the corner of the office to capture the meeting. Hills pushed her to nearly 6 feet tall. Dressed in a chic, slim-fitted dress, Ellie looked more like a model than a surgeon. But Sydney knew well the preparation people took when they were about to be recorded. Thanks for meeting with me, Sydney said. Of course. When Grace told me you finally contacted her, we were elated. I received your letters, Sydney said. I read all of them. Over the years, Ellie had been nearly as persistent as Grace with letters and emails asking for Sydney's help. I'm sure you're swamped with requests, Ellie said. I'm just grateful Grace's story will finally be told. So much of what's out there was distorted during her trial. We're going to work to clear that up, Sydney said. Derek will record while we talk. You'll get used to the cameras. Just ignore it the best you can. Ellie pointed to the desk and they both sat down. Derek moved into position. How much of what we will discuss will be used? As much as is relevant, Sydney said, but I'll let you know what I think we'll use before I cut the episode. All I need is for you to answer the questions honestly. I know we're talking about events from 10 years ago and longer, so do the best you can. Like you said, the public knows only Grace Sabol, the convicted murderer. In the next episode, we're going to show them who Grace was before Sugar Beach. I spoke with the Sabols yesterday and understand a lot about Grace that I didn't know before. I'm hoping to expand on that history today. Are you ready? Ellie nodded. Tell me how you know Grace. Ellie offered a small laugh. Grace and I have been friends since grade school. Gosh, third or fourth grade, I suppose. We've been inseparable since then, all the way through high school. We stayed close through college and medical school. I was at SUNY and Grace was at Boston University. And you were with Grace in St. Lucia's at Sugar Beach? Yes. Charlotte Brooks, one of our best friends from high school, invited us to her wedding. She was marrying Daniel Greaves, another friend of ours. We all gathered at Sugar Beach like it was a high school reunion. Julian was Grace plus one. And for the last 10 years, you've practiced medicine? Yes, obstetrics. Over the years when Ellie Reiser had learned to survive the rigors of surgical residency and the demands of hospital life as a busy physician, Grace had learned to survive in a foreign penitentiary. Sydney would make sure that point came through clearly in the next episode. Did you know Julian, Chris? Not well, Ellie said, but yes, I knew him. I knew Grace was crazy about him. They met in India during the summer after second year of medical school when Grace volunteered for a couple of weeks with the Doctors Without Borders program. Julian was at NYU, so I had only met him a couple of times before Sugar Beach. During the trip to Sugar Beach, Grace and Julian broke the news that they were accepted to the same residential program in neurosurgery. But Grace's interest was not always neurology. Am I correct? That's right, Ellie said. She had wanted to go in obstetrics, same as myself. For most of our childhood, we both wanted to deliver babies. Grace was born with. Ellie stopped. I'm not sure how much Grace told you, but she was born with a rare form of leukemia. Yes, Sydney said. Marshall was a matching bone marrow donor. That's right, Ellie said. It made Grace want to deliver babies. She said she wanted to protect them. Ellie smiled. That was our thing, sort of our childhood dream that we shared. What changed her mind about obstetrics? There was a short pause as Ellie searched for the correct wording. Marshall's accident. Did Grace's parents tell you about that? They did. Marshall has a lot of trouble since then. He's not. TBI had changed a person's personality and caused a number of physical ailments as well. TBI, traumatic brain injury, Sydney said to clarify. Correct. Marshall was never the same after the accident, and it broke Grace's heart. Marshall's condition is what caused Grace to go into neurology. Ellie blinked a few times. That was the plan. She obviously never got the chance. The accident, Sydney said. I understand the driver of the U-Haul truck was charged with DUI. Yes. I still sense, though, that Marshall holds you in contempt. He had a roundabout way of telling me about you. Ellie nodded slowly. I'm afraid that will likely never change. Sydney pulled a stack of papers from her bag. I counted 62 letters that you've sent me over the last 3 years asking for help, Sydney said. What makes you so certain Grace is innocent? Oh, so many things, Ellie said. She's my best friend, first of all, and I know she could never kill anyone. But that's a subjective answer, and I understand it doesn't stand up to scrutiny. That's just what's in my heart. The better answer is that I was with Grace the night Julian died, slept in her cottage at the resort. Simply stated, I'm her alibi. You can run the timeline any way you like, and I have many times over the years. There is no way Grace could have killed Julian that night. How did the investigators and detectives in St. Lucius respond when you told them this? They didn't. They interviewed me once and never asked me another question. During that long interview, though, did you tell them you were with Grace the night Julian was killed? Of course, but they weren't interested in details that didn't support their narrative. I eventually told my story to Grace's attorney, but my testimony was not allowed during the trial. Why? Ellie offered a dejected expression. The prosecutor argued that I'd been drinking that day and that evening, and I was intoxicated. He argued that although I slept in Grace's room, I was too drunk to know if she left after what they suggested, passed out. At trial, the prosecution petitioned the magistrate to keep my testimony out of the courtroom. The request was granted. Had you been drinking? Ellie nodded. We were 25 years old, and on spring break, we were all drinking. Were you drunk? Not to the point that I don't remember being with Grace that night. Did you pass out? Ellie shrugged her shoulders. I've never been a big drinker. I didn't even taste alcohol until my 21st birthday. So I was not intoxicated to the point that the prosecution was suggesting. I fell asleep at some point, but did I fall on my face passed out? No, I went to sleep. In Grace's cottage? Yes. Why did you sleep in Grace's room that night? She was upset. She and Julian had gotten into an argument. Grace asked me to come to her cottage, so I did. I was being a good friend. The fight about Daniel? Ellie nodded. It was probably my fault, the fight they had. How so? I wasn't keen on how fast things were moving between them. I felt like Grace might be getting it over her head. In what way? Ellie shrugged. Julian was planning to propose. I thought it was a bad idea. How do you know this? Sydney asked. Because he told me. I mentioned that I thought it was too soon to ask her. Ellie shook her head. It didn't matter. He never got the chance. Ellie's eyes glassed over as though she might cry. He was gone the next day. Okay. The Girl of Sugar Beach, The Proposal, part of episode 2, based on the interview with Ellie Reiser. The members of the wedding party lay on the loungers around the pool and soaked up the Caribbean sun. The guys drank Paton beer and the girls sipped rum runners and mojitos. Charlotte Brooks, the bride, had invited 5 of her girlfriends as bridesmaids, including Grace and Ellie. In their mid-20s now, they were all at different stages of life. Charlotte was an elementary school teacher about to marry her high school sweetheart, whom she had dated since they had all met in Fayetteville, New York. Grace and Ellie were now in medical school. One other bridesmaid was finishing law school, and the others were scattered in marketing and event planning. Daniel Greaves was the groom. He too had invited a host of friends from high school as his groomsmen. Since the group had known each other for years, many of their parents were invited to the wedding, and a few, including the Sabots, had made the long trip to St. Lucia's. Ellie, Charlotte said, where did you place? Duke. To deliver babies? Ellie smiled. Yes, OBGYN. So if Daniel and I get pregnant, you can deliver my baby? Charlotte laughed. Too many mojitos. Give me a few years to figure out what I'm doing first. Don't worry, Charlotte said, leaning back in her lounge chair and crossing her legs. Her Bottega Veneta crocodile flip-flops were covering her feet. We'll need some practice before we have a baby. Wear those $800 flip-flops to bed, Ellie said, and I'm sure Daniel will want to practice often. This brought laughs from the other intoxicated friends who sat around the pool. The peaks of Paton, draped with green foliage and rainforests, rose up on either side of the resort. Petit Paton to the north and Gros Paton to the south, massive twin volcanic structures that held Sugar Beach Resort between them. Are you guys ever going to stop making fun of my shoes? I could finance medical school with what you spend on footwear, Ellie said. But they're so pretty. Anyway, Daniel and I have been together since high school, so we're not going to wait too long. We know we're right together. You guys broke up for a while, didn't you? Ellie asked, in college. Grace put a stare on Ellie and squinted her eyes. What the hell? She mouthed as she brought her mojito to her lips. Yeah, Charlotte said, but just for a couple of months. Besides that, we've been together for close to 10 years now. Of course, Ellie said. That's my point. She glanced briefly at Grace with a suppressed grin. You guys took a break to see other people and then decided you were right for each other. It's the best way to do it. Make sure, you know. I was a mess for 2 months, never left my house that summer. Daniel was the same way. Neither of us dated anyone, just took a break and then ran back to each other. Well, Ellie said, you two did it the right way. Took a break, got into other things, another quick smirk at Grace, and then found each other again. Yes, Grace said, you're great together. You, Daniel, and your outrageous overpriced shoes. Cheers to you guys. Really, Char, we're so happy for you. They touched glasses. So Ellie will be at Duke. And where did you end up, Charlotte asked. Cornell in New York, Grace said. Neurology, right? Neurosurgery. Wow, Charlotte says. That sounds so, I don't know, serious. Grace looked back at Ellie. OBGYN is serious too, and seriously difficult. But yes, I'm expecting it to be a challenge. And Julian? Charlotte asked. Julie and I placed together. Aw, Charlotte said, that's the sweetest thing I ever heard. So when are we all coming back here for your wedding? Grace smiled. Who knows, maybe after residency. Ellie had met Julie and Chris a handful of times over the last year and a half since he and Grace started dating. The first time Julian had caught Grace's eyes, Ellie knew, was during the summer after second year when Grace went off to do volunteer work in India. She met Julian on that trip, both spending a 3-week stint aiding in a general surgery clinic in Delhi. Despite that Julian was at NYU and Grace was in Boston, the miles didn't seem to hurt their relationship. Grace and Ellie had discussed the pros and cons of a serious relationship during medical school and what sort of distractions it might cause, and about how difficult long-distance relationships were to maintain. Ellie had gently warned her friend to be careful going into a crucial third year of medical school. 18 months later, Grace and Julian were going strong, were damn near inseparable, and were both heading off to a highly competitive surgical residency, where they would be pitted against one another. Ellie stirred her mojito at the thatch roof beach bar, sitting on a stool and looking out toward Patan's Bay and the sun waltzing over the calm water. Julian walked up next to her. Hey, he said. Ellie smiled. Hi, Julian. I've hardly had a chance to talk with you this trip. I know this is the first afternoon the bridesmaids haven't been ordered around. I think Charlotte saw that we were all stressed out and pissed off that we came to this beautiful resort and haven't had the chance to enjoy it. You guys are good friends, Julian said. I don't even talk with anyone from high school anymore. Really? We're like a cult. No kidding. I'm feeling a little like an outsider. Don't be silly. Everyone loves you. Grace loves you, so that's good enough for me. Julian smiled. Thanks. That's why I wanted to talk to you. He looked back over his shoulder to make sure Grace was occupied. She lay on a pool longer and soaked up the sun. About what? Julian placed a small jewelry box onto the granite bar and looked at Ellie. Ellie stared at the box for a moment, then slowly asked, What is that? I'm going to ask Grace to marry me. I need your help to pull it off. Ellie also looked back towards Grace. She put her hand over the box and glanced around. The other patrons of the beach bar sucked pina colada through straws and tilted bottles of Patan beer up to the sky. You're kidding me, right? Ellie asked. Kidding? No, I'm dead serious. You guys just met. Julian laughed in his casual manner, flashing his perfect teeth and sharp angled jaw. We met a year and a half ago, Ellie. We've been inseparable since. Ellie leaned closer. You go to school in New York and she's in Boston. That's the opposite of inseparable. You're actually separated almost all the time. We've been very good Amtrak customers. Ellie rolled her eyes. Every weekend we have free, one of us travels. It works for us, and next year we'll both be in New York. And then, during residency, yes, that will be a new form of inseparable. Listen, Julian, I'm happy for you guys, but why don't you wait to see how things go before you jump into an engagement? I mean, what's the rush? Julian reached for the engagement ring. Ellie relinquished her hold on it, and he slipped it back into his pocket. Forget I asked, he said. No, that's not what I meant. I just want to make sure no one gets hurt. How will proposing hurt Grace? I don't know, Julian. A lot has changed lately. Up until March Day, Grace was looking at UNC and Duke for her residency. Then she matches with you in New York. She never told me any of this, and that's fine. It's her business. For but for nearly 4 years, her plan was to go to North Carolina, and now suddenly she'll be in New York for the next 7 years. When you make these huge decisions without putting a lot of thought into them, you sometimes regret them later. I don't want the same thing to happen with a proposal. Julian nodded his head. He tipped his baton back and drank the last third in one swallow. We've actually put a lot of thought into this. All of it. Our residency and getting married. You see, Ellie, Grace and I talk a lot when you're not present. I know it's hard for you to imagine, but Grace does things in her life that don't include you. He put his empty beer bottle down. No kidding. More and more lately. At least, act surprised when she tell you. Julian turned to leave. Ellie grabbed his wrist. Wait, Julian. He turned back. What? I'm her best friend, so I'm only bringing this up to prove a point. Bringing what up? Ellie took a deep breath, looked back over at Grace lying by the pool. Has Grace told you about Daniel? Ooh, a messy, hateful friend. Oh, told me what? See, maybe you guys don't know each other as well as you think. That's the end of chapter 19. Oh, here we go with another messy friend. Another person who claims she friends with somebody. Okay, Ellie. I was sensing that she was jealous and didn't want Grace to be happy when she was being interviewed by Sydney. But now this put the nail in the coffin. Ellie is a jealous friend, and that's the most dangerous one, because why the heck would you tell him when Grace asks you to drop the subject and leave it alone, and it only happened one time and it was done and it was over? Oh, I don't like people like that. So that's what the argument was over. Had Ellie not said anything, they wouldn't be arguing. So she sabotaged Grace's happiness. Now I'm thinking she killed Daniel. She killed Julian. Woo, we shall see. I'm going to see y'all in the next chapter, honey.